just easier to keep it a page.
Yeah, you make me write more.
Yeah. Well, good morning again. It's good to see you here as we continue in our series, Prayer That Works, the power of persistent prayer. And so this morning I have a couple stories for you here. You ready? So here's the first one. An organ in a large church broke down one Sunday morning, and just right before the services were to begin. And so a member of the congregation just happened to be an organ repairman. How good is that? And so he immediately went to work on the instrument, the organ, and finding it that was actually a pretty simple electrical problem. And when he finally got it fixed, it was just about the middle of the sermon, and he quietly passed a note to the organist which read, "After prayer, the power will be on." Good little story here. Second one. There's supposedly this true story of a Welsh woman who lived in a remote valley in Wales. And she went to a great deal of trouble and expense, I might add, to have electrical power installed into her home. However, after a couple of months, the electric company noticed that she didn't seem to use very much electricity at all. And thinking that there might be a problem with the hookup, they sent a meter reader out to check on the matter. Well, the man came to the door and said, "We've just checked your meter and it doesn't seem that you're using very much electricity." And he said, "Is there a problem?" At which she responded, "Oh no, we're quite satisfied with it. We turn on the electric lights every night to see how to light our lamps, and then we switch them off again." Now, why didn't this woman make more use of her electricity? She believed in electricity. She believed the promises of the electric company when they told her about it. She went to great expense and trouble and the expenses to have her house wired for it, but she didn't understand the potential of electricity in her home. And so she used it sparingly, didn't she? The power that she had at her grasp was used sparingly. And I suspect that there are people who use prayer very much the same way. They believe in prayer. They know of the promises that God has made. They've even read and heard stories about answered prayers, but they use power sparingly. And I believe that the reason that happens, at least for some Christians, is that many don't understand how prayer works. And many people believe that it doesn't really matter whether they pray or not. They either believe that God's going to do what God's going to do, so why bother? Or they regard prayer as kind of that last resort of all their other efforts when all those efforts have failed. You know, it's kind of like in football, a Hail Mary pass. They throw it up in the air and they hope that it reaches its destination and caught by one of their players. You see, they'll pray a little bit, they'll throw up occasional appeals, but in their hearts, they don't view prayer as making that big of an impact on the decisions that they make every day. Earlier we read in Daniel, we heard about Daniel. And you see, Daniel was different. Daniel didn't pray like that. Daniel prayed 3 times every day. He prayed in his room. He prayed in the lion's den. He prayed for wisdom. He prayed for guidance. He prayed that God would forgive the sins of his people, Israel, and return them to their home because they were in captivity. And here in Daniel chapter 10, we find that Daniel is struggling in prayer for 21 days because he's troubled by this dream, this vision that he's had. And so he's fasting and praying. And he's doing this for 21 days. Now, many Christians would have trouble praying for 21 days for just about anything. That's difficult at times. So stick with it. I mean, can you remember the last time you prayed 21 days for one thing? However, that's what Daniel did. When Jesus was here, he told an interesting story in Luke chapter 18. In Luke chapter 18, Luke writes this, verses 1 through 7 in Luke chapter 18. Says, "Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. He said this, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared about men. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, 'Grant me justice against my adversary.' For some time he refused the woman. But finally he said to himself, 'Even though I don't fear God or care about men, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so that she won't eventually wear me out with her coming.' And the Lord Jesus said this, 'Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off?' You see, Jesus taught us that we ought to always pray and not give up. Always pray and not give up. We should probably be like the little 3-year-old that Paul Harvey told the story about years ago, who went to the grocery store with his mother, and before they got into the grocery store, the mother said, 'Look, you are not going to get any chocolate chip cookies, so don't even ask. Don't ask.' So she put him in the car as usual, and he sat in the seat there, and while she wheeled down the aisles, he was just doing fine until they came to that aisle. You know the aisle, the cookie section. And he saw the chocolate chip cookies, and he stood up in the seat and said, 'Mom, can I have some chocolate chip cookies?' And she said, 'I told you to not even ask. You're not getting any at all.' And so he sat back down. And they continued on their shopping, but, if they're like my mother-in-law, which this woman probably was, she went and she kept forgetting different things, so she had to go back searching, and so they'd end up at the cookie aisle. Of course, every time they did, 'Mom, can I please have some chocolate chip cookies?' And she reminded, 'I told you, no, no, you're not getting any chocolate chip cookies. Now sit down and be quiet.' And finally, they were approaching the checkout lane, and the little boy sensed that this might be his last chance. So just before they got to the line, he stood up in the seat, and he shouted in his loudest voice, 'In the name of Jesus, may I have some chocolate chip cookies?' And everybody around there just smiled and laughed. Some even applauded. And you know what? Due to the generosity of other shoppers, that little boy and his mother left with 23 boxes of chocolate chip cookies. We ought always to pray and not give up. But once again, why? Why should we always pray and not give up? I mean, is God deaf? Is it hard to get his attention? Do we have to keep bothering him until he throws up his hands in disgust and says, "If I don't grant their request, I'll never get any rest"? That's not our God. And I don't think that's the issue at all. In fact, our text this morning, Daniel chapter 10, tells us something entirely different. Look at verses 10 through 12. Notice it says, remember, Daniel's been praying and fasting for 21 days. He says, the angel says to him, "Since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them." Since the first day. This isn't the first time that Daniel has done this, and this has happened to him. Matter of fact, if you jump over to Daniel chapter 9, it says, as soon as you began to pray, an answer was given. He says, this is verse 23 in chapter 9, which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the message and understand the vision. In other words, every time you and I pray, not only does God gladly hear our prayers, but an angel is immediately sent from the throne of God to answer our prayers. But that really doesn't answer why should we always pray and not give up. The story of Daniel's prayer gives us at least one reason why that should be true. Consider what that says. It says, from the very first day, Daniel prayed his prayer that they were heard, and an angel was sent. But this is one of those rare times where, if you will, God pulls back the curtain and lets us see what's happening behind the scenes. You ever gone to a school play, or maybe even more a Broadway play or something of that nature, and you go, and of course you're waiting for everything, and there's the curtain, right? Do you ever think what's going on behind the curtain unless you were the prop guy? Stuff is always happening back there when those curtains are closed, aren't they? And every once in a while, the curtain will go open too fast, or somebody forgot something. You see somebody running and putting something where it needs to be, right? There's things that are going on. And that's exactly what God is doing here. He's drawing back the curtain so that we would see what is ordinarily happening or what's hidden to our eyes. You see, when Daniel prayed, demonic forces rose up, if you will, the prince of Persia, and an angelic warfare broke out. Now think about that for a second. You know what that means? That means that when you pray, you turn loose the very powers of heaven. That means when you pray, you have the power to battle the very forces of darkness. That means that when you pray, angels are willing to fight to answer your prayers. Hebrews 1:14 reminds us, angels are ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation. So when you pray, angels are at our beck and call, or as God sends them for that. So that leads me to a rather interesting question. I always have been a why child. Always have lots of questions. Daniel prayed 21 days, right? The angel was sent on the first day that he prayed, but he didn't arrive until the 21st day. That's my question. What might have happened had Daniel given up in his prayers? What if he had quit on, say, the 14th day? Or the 15th? The 16th? We can go on, right? What if he had given up? Would the angel have arrived with his answer? The Bible doesn't say, but the implication is maybe not. Daniel continued to pray and fast for 21 days. And Jesus taught that we should always pray and not give up. Not because God is hard of hearing, not because he needs to be pestered into answering our requests,